let's just, in general, start with Eldridge. I mean, where do you see opportunities? The world is upside down. There's a possible new world order. There's a lot of volatility. There's a lot of AI. Where do you go for the next opportunity?
Well, I think we try to find simple businesses that we can understand and apply technology to them. I think one great example is what we're doing with Metropolis. Metropolis is a company that we started a couple years ago, where we came up with a facial recognition technology that could identify license plates. And basically, it's changed how parking works in the US. So you drive in, you drive out, you don't need to worry about gates or tickets or payment. And we charge a 99-cent convenience fee. And for that, we're going to make $180 per spot per year. So we just bought the largest parking lot operator, and we have 2 million parking spots now under management. And we've had $150 million of EBITDA. And if you look at $180 per spot per year times 2 million, we should be able to get to $500 million of EBITDA. But not only is that just good on its own, we're adding 30,000 members a day, right? People who are basically parking with us. So now we have 15 million members that are using our parking spots and looking for them because the friction of use is so low, and they just get in and get out.
What kind of deals do you look for now? Because of the valuations, because of volatility, do you think you can find more deals on the cheap, or do you still just want to look for those plays that will make a difference in people's lives?
I think our funnel is pretty wide. I think we can invest up and down the capital structure. I never wanted to be pigeonholed into, oh, you have to do this or you have to do that, because ultimately you end up becoming a derivative of the market that you're invested in. So, for example, right now we think investment-grade bonds aren't really good risk. I think U.S. Treasuries, long-dated U.S. Treasuries are interesting. I also think high-yield bonds, you're not getting paid enough for the credit spreads. Senior secured loans, I like. You sit at the top of the capital structure. So, people are, because really when you think about where you play in a capital structure is just a derivative to the underlying assets. And where you sit is really just, what's the value proposition relative to the underlying asset. Because it all comes down to price and rates of return. But
is there something that you don't like in this kind of environment?
Well, I generally don't like investment-grade bonds because I generally think that their lack of covenants is pretty bad. And if you go back to kind of the 2005, 6, 7 era, LBOs were occurring, and they were rolling the investment-grade bonds and making them non-investment-grade bonds overnight. So I think they have low protections, and I don't think they offer any real yield. So I think I'd much rather be, senior secured credit in non-investment grade businesses, with much better documentation than investment grade bonds in a world where you're not sure what's going to happen to them.
Todd, you've also raised a significant amount of money actually in the Middle East. How do you see this region?
I think this region is the most exciting part of the world for the next couple of decades. I think the growth that's going on here, the energy that's here, they're great partners. They're very reliable and very stable. And having been here last week with President Trump's delegation, just seeing how Qatar put on what was just an amazing event. It's a testament to the fact that they're really on the world stage.
And this is what money that will be used in the region or actually deployed elsewhere?
Well, obviously, if you look at Qatar and the UAE in particular, they've done an amazing job building out their country, and their countries aren't very big. So as they continue to generate more and more capital, the likelihood of them investing in their own backyard, is unlikely at real scale because of what they've built out. And the fact is that prices just couldn't handle it. But I think continuing to help them build industries. We're spending a lot of time in Saudi right now thinking about the insurance industry, right? Because if you look at insurance companies, they align so nicely with infrastructure development. And if you had a very large insurance industry, that would go a long way to help build out the infrastructure, right, which they're going to need for the World Cup and for the Expo and everything that's coming. So I think there's lots of different opportunities in the region, and That's why we're so excited to have offices here and continue to develop our activity here.
Away from insurance, is there anything else that you see as especially attractive in the next couple of years in the region and in Qatar specifically?
Yeah, I think continuing to develop markets. I think the reason that, in my opinion at least, the reason that the U.S. is so creative and innovative and has so much interesting development and has most of the largest trillion-dollar businesses is because we have the best capital markets. And capital market development is really what creates the funding in order to pursue ideas. So in America, any idea you have, there's a market for it, right? So building markets, like the securitization markets in the U.S., really allowed for non-financial companies to get into the financial industry business. And that was really a derivative of making the securitization markets so competitive. So building securitization markets and continuing to grow markets and figuring out how to continuously fund ideas, I think that's going to be the next stage of growth for these markets.
But Todd, given tariffs and trade and the volatility we saw in the last couple of months, do you think it'll have a longer-term impact on the U.S.? We talk about U.S. exceptionalism. Without that being at play, do you just see a legacy staying?
I'm pretty sure that when everyone is telling me that one thing's about to happen, the odds of it happening are pretty low. And so if you look at the movie 13 Days, right, which talks about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and you look at the scene where JFK is talking to one of the Joint Chiefs, and he's basically screaming at the Joint Chiefs saying, do not launch this missile. Don't you see what's actually going on here? This is just the president communicating with Castro. And to me, a lot of the tariffs conversation is just a communication at scale that's going on. And so, I'm not going to get so sucked into the day-to-day, right? Because, of course, what they've done is changed directions multiple times. And I think one of the strengths of of our administration is that they are willing to pivot when it's not going the way they like. So the fact that they've pivoted so many times so quickly, right, is a testament to, I think they're communicating at scale to try to figure out how to fix things. And the reality is, time goes by so fast. And if you're the president, you have very little bit of time. And people will argue, well, it's not well planned, it's not well thought out. The problem is there's so many permutations and what can go on, right? It's hard to figure out exactly what's going to happen. So, unlike a lot of people that, seem to be, panicking over this, I'm pretty calm about it. And if you look at this over, it's a 20-year trade or a 30-year trade, right? You're never going to pick, the highs and the lows, and you're just going to have to kind of put your blinders on and, just stay focused on what's directly in front of you.
Todd, on Chelsea, is it fun owning a football club like Chelsea, or is it at times a bit of a headache?
I think it's a combination of both, right? But it's like owning anything. Almost anything I own is both fun and a headache. So I think this one's a little more in my face every day. But the fact is, the good news is the bad news, right? If people didn't care, right, then it would stink. So it's a testament to how much the sport matters. And if you look at the Premier League right now, there's so much excitement in it, especially what's going on in the last weekend, right? Like, there's 7 teams that could be making Champions League. There's going to be the winner of Tottenham and Man United will go to Champions League. We'll have a team. We'll probably have 9 teams in European competition out of the Premier League alone, which to me is just a testament to the quality of the product. And to be part of that is a privilege.
Is that what surprised you the most, since being one of the owners of Chelsea, and how, the level at which...
I think the level of competition is ferocious. And the margins of errors are so small. And I don't think I fully appreciated, the level, the margin of error is so small. I think the sport's gotten more and more competitive in the Premier League, and that makes winning all that much sweeter. And I guess I really didn't know how much I would love a goal. A goal feels so good, and giving up a goal is just the worst, right? It's like, in basketball you can be down 20 points in the fourth quarter and feel like you're still in it. In baseball, you hit a home run and it's fantastic. But a goal, there's nothing like a goal.
Do you worry about the future of media rights? I mean, valuations in France and other countries have bombed. Is there a danger that the same will happen to the Premier League?
I think as long as the competition stays what it is, people all around the world, I mean, it's one of the few things that's sold into every market, right? So if you look at the Premier League media rights, other than I think Russia and North Korea, there's a contract to sell the content into every other country. There's nothing like that. So I think as long as the product remains so competitive and the management of it, and the reality is I think these things are just going to continue to grow. I think sports is going to continue to grow in demand. I think in the U.S. we're seeing it, right? College has become a new professional sport, with the advent of NIL. Arch Manning, who plays football for the University of Texas, American football, is going to make over $6 million playing football, in college. So I think the level of performance is going to continue to go younger and younger and younger, as people become more and more competitive.
Do you want to increase your role at Chelsea?
My role? Mm-hmm. I think chairman's a pretty good one. I can't play. Or maybe I'll go out as striker, see how the fans think about that.
But there's no, I mean, there's rumors about you taking a back seat or anything like that. That's nothing that you're.
No, we have a good partnership. Of course, like every partnership, you have times that you got to work through and times that are better. And I think we hit the ground running in such a intense timeline, that it was just a complex moment. But I think we're through it and we're excited about what the future holds. We think we've got one of the best young teams. We were early on doing kind of 7, 8, 9-year contracts, because we really wanted to make sure that we could keep the team together for a long time. If you read a book called Captain's Class, right, it talks about the 15 best teams, in the world. And I think one of the things that you see, is in order to have a really good team, you ultimately need stability, within the team, within the environment. And the only way that comes is through time, but I think we've set it up to be able to benefit from that.
So, I mean, I think we're going through the numbers. There are now nearly enough American-owned teams in the Premier League to get together to actually enforce, rule changes like matches abroad, salary caps. Do you see the American teams voting together to bring around some changes?
I think we believe very much in the culture, and obviously we've been educated, from the past. So we're very focused on making sure we maintain the culture.
What happens if the team doesn't make the Champions League again? Is there a risk that you could lose some big players?
We don't have any clauses like that in any of our contracts.
I mean, in general, what's the transfer window looking like? I know you can't give out too many secrets because there's a lot of people in the room, but are you excited?
I think obviously we're going to the Club World Cup. So right now we're laser focused on the Club World Cup. We have some players that are joining us for the Club World Cup that weren't on the team. So, Andre Santos is coming from Strasbourg. We're really excited about him and what we think he can add to the squad. The challenge that we really have is how many matches these guys are playing. The calendar is really tight, and they put in so much effort and energy. And the injuries are continuing to go up and up and up, so I think, we're going to have to revisit, how, what's the calendar look like and how much football, can they actually play? Obviously, they're built to play football. They love playing football. So we're trying to find the balance as to, what's the right amount of football.
Yeah, what's your ideal calendar? What does that look like?
That's not my job.
How much, we're getting laughs because everybody wants to know. That's what everybody wants to know. Will you spend big again in the transfer window?
Listen, I think we've done most of our investing. And, I think we're not looking at it as a spend. We look at it as an investment. And we're trying to build, the best portfolio of players that can perform, at the highest level for the longest periods of time. So, I think there's going to be, a lot of investment in this window, just what I'm hearing and what we're feeling. And there's going to be a lot of, well-heeled clubs that are going to be looking to add to, their teams. And I think that that's only good for the Premier League.
So a more targeted approach. You know, you have a lot of Chelsea fans actually out there.
Yes. I think we know what we need to do. We know the places that we need to invest. So that's going to be our focus.
Todd, I mean, when looking at sports, you're also part owner of the Dodgers. I mean, there's so much more emotion, right, than parking lots or anything like.
Yeah.
I mean, is that how you build a portfolio, like a bit of emotion, a bit less emotion?
I think early on we looked at this and said, let's have our strategy be really simple. Like, what do people need and what do people want? And so I think if you look at, we started a company called A24 from scratch. In 2012, we put up $19 million, and A24 is probably the #1 independent film and TV company in America now. And so, getting behind the right leaders, the right managers, the right CEOs, the right creatives, I think all those things are applicable in almost every industry. Whether you're doing product development or, TV and film development, I think that you realize even like finance, people don't think of finance as a creative business, but I think it's super creative.
Less emotional than football. Maybe we can agree on that.
Losing money is a painful thing.
How are the differences with Clear Lake on stadium development at Chelsea?
I think long term we just have to figure out. We recognize that a club like Chelsea needs a 65,000 person stadium. And we also recognize that that's going to be important to be able to compete long term. So I think we'll figure that out.
I know I have a cricket question, because you and a consortium are basically won a bidding round for a team in Nottingham, but the whole process is yet to complete. Are you confident that that will be completed with a positive outcome for you?
I think cricket is a really exciting sport, and you look at what's going on in India, and you look at the media rights in India, and you look at the ability to expand it globally, and I think we're in the early innings of cricket. But obviously, when you look at the size and scale of India, to be able to export that game around the world, right? And who knows? I think the convergence of cricket and baseball is also really intriguing, right? Because it's a similar skill set. And we now have, in Uganda, we have a Dodger facility. So we just signed our first African player to a professional contract. And I think that's, really exciting as we continue to export these sports all around the world.
But on cricket, if London Spirit became available, would you rather buy that instead of the Nottingham team? I
mean, I think the guys that wanted to buy London Spirit were really clear that they were going to buy it. And, I don't like to get in front of trucks.
That's a good life, generally a good life lesson. The president likes baseball. I mean, again, because you own the Dodgers, Pete Rose, should he be elected to the Hall of Fame?
This is a super controversial discussion. My point of view is, and I don't know, I'm not an expert on it, and I don't know all the ins and outs, but if the baseline was, he was one of the best players ever, he had more hits than anyone, he only bet on his team, he only did it as a manager, not a player. If those things are all true, then I wouldn't have any problem with him in the Hall of Fame. And I think the challenge that he offers people is, I think perhaps he didn't have any remorse. So the not having remorse about the rules that he violated, but I don't think assuming that he was betting only on his own team, I don't know why inherently that's more evil than performance enhancing drugs for improving drugs, for example.
Todd, when you look at sports around the world, is there anything else that you find exciting, or where we could see you get involved in the future?
I mean, I think really focusing on developing, we own something called the St. James in Washington, D.C., and it's basically 500,000 square feet of athletic facilities, and we've got the best facilities. We've got 8 basketball courts, we've got pools, we've got diving boards, we've got a field house, we do both football and European football matches in there. We've got a health club, and our morning business is fantastic. Our afternoon business is fantastic. Our summer camps are fantastic. And now what we've built is a school. And so where you utilize every day part, and because we have the best real estate and it's all indoors, right, we can basically get the best coaches. Right. And if we can get the best coaches, we can get the best athletes. And as NIL and the professional elements of sports and compensation move to younger and younger, we're seeing more and more demand. I mean, we've got two sheets of ice for hockey at the St. James, and they're filled up every day. I mean, you just can't get enough ice time, right? So when we look at, I want to grow that business because, again, I'm not really worried about AI displacing that. Every one of them will be kind of roughly 100 million of revenue and 40 million of EBITDA, and if we had 30 of those, right, that's before we start thinking about sponsorship opportunities and other benefits, because once you have a fleet of St. James, you'll have quite a moat.
Todd, we have 15 seconds left. Greatest sports person of all time you'd like to meet, and what would you ask them or tell them?
Well, it's not really going to resonate with this audience probably, but there was a gentleman by the name of Dan Gable. And Dan Gable was probably one of the best wrestlers all time. And as a wrestler, I admire Dan Gable. He was undefeated all the way through college. And unfortunately, he lost his very last match. But the guy was just tough as nails. And he built Iowa into the best wrestling program. So as a young wrestler, I was so aspirational of Iowa. And I would just ask him, what was it like to dominate day in and day out, just kind of like our Chelsea women just did.
There you go. That's a perfect way to end. Todd Boehly, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.